Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:02. With great respect and humility, we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. Do we have any additions, deletions, or changes in order to tonight's agenda? And just a reminder to if you could use the chat to let me know if you have anything you need to add or. Okay, seeing none, I seek a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Motion to approve from Mark Robinson, seconded by Leanne Lee. Anyone opposed to the agenda? Again, please use the chat to let us know. Seeing none, the agenda is approved unanimously. Seeking a motion for approval of the minutes of the Business Committee meeting held March 8th, 2020, March 8th, 2023. Sorry about that. Motion from Mark Robinson, seconder, please. Seconded from Leanna Pellegrin. Anyone opposed? Seeing no opposition, the minutes are accepted unanimously. We have no presentations tonight. We do have a number of senior staff reports. Item 8.1, Mark Walsh, Secretary Treasurer, regarding the Audit Committee and Policy Update.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Chair. So the first item on the agenda this evening, there's a recommendation with respect to a board bylaw, as well as a small recommendation with respect to board policy. Specifically, it's about audit. And so what we are recommending, and it's odd that we're recommending the deletion of a bylaw that created an audit committee, but the reality is we have a situation that we have a committee in the books that does not meet and has not met for over a decade, and that is the audit committee. And so there's no legislative requirement for said committee. However, we do also want to recognize that previous staff and previous boards we're not proceeding without an audit function. It just happens to be that we're the committee, the business committee, where this happens. So I think everyone that's here will recognize that we do quarterly reports, which has an audit function. We have auditors that come to the board. We have reports to the business committee on a variety of projects and how they're doing, etc. And so really the business committee has been the audit function. But when we look at our policies and we look at our bylaws, it's fundamental as a organization that we either follow or fix what we don't follow with respect to those policies. And so the bylaw, so we are recommending the deletion of the audit bylaw, and we have three rationale for that. So number one, of course, on page 11 of the agenda, is that we should avoid policies or bylaws that conflict. And so, for instance, the bylaw says that the board has 3 committees, when actually board policy says the board has 2 committees. So one of those things needs to be fixed. And we suggest that, again, it's better to delete the bylaw than it would be to reinvigorate it and essentially, point 2, overlap the function of the business committee. And so we would rather suggest a change in wording to be explicit that the business committee serves the audit function as well in policy 2.5 of the board. And part of that is that in my experience, when you have a separate audit committee, particularly with trustees on it, there is a relatively different amount of information that a small select group are getting on a fairly fundamental aspect of board governance, and that is the oversight of the finances of the district. And so we think that the business committee is the most appropriate place. It hasn't been overwhelmed by the quarterly reporting and year-end and amended annual, etc. And then the last piece, of course, is that we're actually intending to expand a little bit on our internal audit process, which would be coming to the business committee anyway, and in fact is the next item on the agenda. What we are not suggesting is just to delete the bylaw without consultation, because of course, if there's great concern that this is actually going to impact the transparency of the district, we we'd be better off reinvigorating the committee. However, again, the recommendation is we don't see the need for that given the alternatives that are there that serve the same function. So happy to answer any questions, but the recommended motion is there.
Question. Oh, before we move the motion, does anyone have any questions? Because I do if no one else does. Okay, Mark, my question was, could we then, or would we then maybe, I know that in other districts, their business committee is actually called Business and Operations or Business and Finance. Would we look at changing the name of the business committee to more clearly reflect?
If the board thought that that was important to reflect that, sure. Again, all of those functions like finance comes through business and quarterly comes through business as it stands. So it feels like it's sufficient in its catch-all nature. But if we thought that was important to transparency, then we certainly could. Or for instance, yeah, there's feedback that suggests that we're trying not to be not have public audits, then maybe we do that. But that would be a board decision.
Okay, but that could certainly be an option because my thought was the transparency to make it clear that we're still, that this is the committee where we look at financial pieces. Yeah, okay. All right, seeing no questions, I see Greg seeking to move the motion. So Greg, I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The motion reads as follows, that the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, receive the draft revised policy 2.5 Board Committees Representation and Annual Work Plan, and provide notice that Bylaw 4.2 Audit Committee amended bylaw number 3-2202A be deleted and circulate as a notice of motion for 30 days, utilizing the consultation process as per board governance section 1, 2.7 policy development.
And I see that Trustee Leanne Lee has seconded that motion. Is there, would you like to motivate?
I think Secretary Treasurer Walsh pretty much said everything that needs to be said. I'll just add that I think overall our district does a good job of our audit process, and it's important for us to ensure that we don't have bylaws that are out of date or that we're not following, and this is just a means of cleaning up that bylaw. So I will speak in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion before we call the vote? Seeing none, I will seek to call the vote. Anyone opposed to the recommendation? Seeing none, it carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is 8.2. Again, Mark Walsh, Secretary Treasurer, and Kylie Lowe, our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. So the second one is related to the first in the sense that we just wanted to bring to the board's attention our intended internal audit process that we're rolling out, not to all schools, but the process that we're going to be looking at to ensure that we are having an internal audit. So currently we have KPMG, who is our external auditor. So the board sees them on a yearly basis. They're going to audit our end of year financials. They're going to report to the board directly. But then we are putting together, in addition to the just kind of general compliance policies that we have of the way that our finance department, reviews bills and things like that in the department, we also are going to have some site visits associated with audit and controls to see how things are going at schools, not only to make sure that we're compliant with internal procedures, but also to opportunity to get feedback about how things going. Are we essentially creating, more hassle? What are ideas to improve processes as well? So we don't believe, we have nothing that leads us to suspect that there's fraud or, misdealings going out in the system, but this is just a good idea, and I want to commend Ms. Lowe and her team for putting it together. So the idea we'd go through that checklist that you would see on pages 18 to 21, and then we'll ultimately report back to the board what you'll probably see is a fairly generic, we had the opportunity to do this is some of the things we learned, some of the changes we made. If there's any specific fraud concerns, etc., that arise, you wouldn't see it in a public meeting, of course. We'd probably be reporting that to the board in a closed. And we're going to be very careful also not to be naming schools, particularly at the get-go, because it's not about finding something that's going wrong. It's just making sure that we're all on the same page. And so no one should be likely be seeing the name of schools, because that's not the exercise for us. But we just wanted to show you what the plan is, where our finance department is all back and in place and ready to roll. And Ms. Lowe, I'm not sure if we are already out in the schools yet, or we're just about to be. But
yeah, we actually just started a week and a half ago, and we're finishing up tomorrow at our first elementary school. So super exciting to do this work, and it's good for us too, because we get to learn a little bit more about what things happen in the school, so we can be more supportive to them as well. So it'll be a successful program.
And so the intent would be to work this into the work plan, so you'll know when we do these reports, and then you'd have that internal audit at least once a year, and then you'd have the KPMG external auditors come to the board as well. So happy to answer any questions, but just wanted to bring to the board's attention that program.
Apologies, I was muted. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing our first report on this, and I think it's a great process, and I'm greatly impressed with the continued commitment to transparency. Any questions from anyone? Seeing none, thank you very much. And I will move on to our next item. Thanks, Kylie. Good to see you. All right, Mr. Walsh, on to you again, 8.3. Yeah.
So thank you, Chair. So the first item, well, there's two statutory right-of-ways that we're seeking this evening the board's support for, both related to childcare builds, I believe. And Mr. Bakewell and Mr. Sabo are both present. Just a couple of background things about land disposition, because technically even the putting a right-of-way on land is theoretically a land disposition, but it is so what happened is the School Act and then policies of the ministry require that any land transaction that's going to be in excess of 5 years to a private party, or over 10 years or 10 years less a day with respect to a city, etc., the board would need to have the minister's approval to do that disposition as it would stand. That doesn't apply, however, to rights of way and covenants that are associated with kind of improvements to the land. So here's a situation, and Mr. Bakewell might want to jump on, or Mr. Sabo might want to jump on. We don't have a heck of a lot of choice but to pass this, which is pretty typical in when we're making improvements to our land. So it is there, and you'll see associated with waterworks right of way. So the recommended motion is there, and Mr. Sabo, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, or would just wait for questions.
Just would add that essentially the right of way gives the city of Nanaimo the right to access the water meter on the school sites. And typically we like to have the water meter on city property so they can access it. But given the nature of the design of the schools and the nature of the road right of way, it wasn't possible in either cases. At Forest Park, we have a specific right of way where we could design it such that the water meter was in a surveyed section. And at Chase River, the water meter had to go in the building. So we have a blanket right of way in that case. Thank you.
And as a reminder, at the board, if we were going to pass this, the board will need to have a vote for unanimity, as well as read it 3 times. That's not required at the committee level, so the recommended motion read as is appropriate this evening, but then there'll be additional reading to be done at the board. So if there was a trustee that was going to volunteer, tonight would be the night.
Thank you, Mark. All right, now, all right, first of all, can we get someone to move the recommendation?
Trustee Robinson will move the recommendation.
Thank you, trustee Robinson. You can do the next one, Chantel. All right, so can you have it there to read it, or do you need me to read it for you?
I've got it here.
Thank you.
Let's pass it to Chantel. It's disappeared off my screen. I apologize, Chair.
Okay, Chantel, do you have it on you?
I do.
All right.
Fantastic. Okay. The Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, pass all 3 readings of the bylaw cited as Chase River Elementary School Waterworks Right-of-Way and Covenant Bylaw 2023 in one meeting, and that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, adopt this bylaw cited as Chase River Elementary School Waterworks Right-of-Way and Covenant Bylaw 2023 during the April 26, 2023 regular board meeting.
All right, and I'm gonna, Mr. Trustee Robinson, I'm gonna have you second that, if that's okay.
I will second that. Thank you, Chair.
All right, any discussion or question or any discussion? Seeing none, if anyone's opposed, please note in the chat. Seeing no opposition, the recommendation passes unanimously. And the second one, Mr. Walsh, is also for Forest Park. Is there anything you would like to add, or would you just like me to move to the motion?
I believe, unless there's questions, it's a similar rationale.
All right, thank you. Okay, so if I could get someone to please read the recommendation for the Forest Park right of way. I need a mover. Okay, thanks, Mark. Can you read it, Mark?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, pass all 3 readings of the bylaw cited as Forest Park Elementary School Waterworks Right-of-Way and Covenant Bylaw 2023 in one meeting, and that the Board of Education of the School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, adopt the bylaw cited as Forest Park Elementary School Waterworks Right-of-Way and Covenant Bylaw 2023 during the April 26, 2023 regular board meeting. Chair.
All right, thank you. And that was seconded by Greg Keller. Anyone with discussion? I imagine not, as it's the same as the previous one. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, motion carries unanimously. The recommendation, I should say. All right, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Sabo. Capital plan.
Yes,
8.5 for those following along at home.
Yeah, so starting on page 52 of the agenda. So there is a recommended motion similar to the last where we're going to be seeking the board or the committee recommend all 3 readings plus the bylaw passage at the board meeting. So the item on the agenda is the capital plan response letter and the capital plan that goes with it. And what we have here is some of the best news that I think that the district has had from a capital perspective in quite some time. So no ND on the list yet, but we're working there. But what we're seeing is that the ministry is really paying attention to the work that the board is doing in its long-range facilities work, its alignment with community goals, particularly in Ladysmith, as we'll talk about in just in a moment, as well as supporting our GHG emission and environmental work. And so really there's so many boxes ticked by this capital plan that the sting of not getting ND, I think, is well more than made up for by what the ministry is supporting in this capital plan. So what it is supporting is the continued seismic upgrade of Ladysmith Intermediate, and to remind everyone that that does include the concept of tearing down and rebuilding either on site or elsewhere. We're in the final stages of that, and we'll be going back to the subcommittee very quickly here, and then the board to approve our final kind of planning with the ministry with their project development report. But part of that plan was problematic in the sense that Ladysmith Primary, part of what the community said is we'd love the idea, or we'd like the idea of 2 K-7s in Ladysmith, one at Davis Road and one at Ladysmith Primary site. But of course, that would make Ladysmith Primary far in excess of its capacity and already has a bunch of portables on the site. So we did apply, and in support of that application was our process publicly, and we have been supported for an addition at Ladysmith Primary. And then finally, the seismic concerns at North Oyster we're also receiving approval to proceed with the North Oyster seismic. And so it's kind of it's everything we asked for with respect to the Ladysmith plan. So it's really positive news in that regard. There's a couple of bumps, though, that we're going to have to figure out. So the ministry is going to fund the seismic, but they won't necessarily fund, like if Davis Road is millions and millions more than a seismic would have been, we're going to have to find some of our own funds to support that. So those are the next set of conversations. But for the time being, this is a huge thumbs up to really fundamentally change the way that we provide education in Ladysmith in alignment with what the community has sought and what this board has supported from what they heard from the community. There's HVAC upgrades at Cedar. So again, when we think about our commitment to geographical distribution of capital, Cedar's getting that. There's going to be some upgrades to Ladysmith bathrooms. And so we've heard concerns about, well, Dover's got this new installation. What about other schools? And you'll see us taking action on that. Brecken Elementary. So again, you got Nanaimo now, HVAC upgrades, and then 2 additional electric buses, which are going to bring our fleet over 30% and moving well on our way to 50. So very positive things in the capital the capital plan response letter, in our opinion, with those caveats that we probably have some tough work to do to find the additional funds to make sure it all happens, but the recommended motion is there. What that allows, the motion will allow, once the board passes, that I, as the Secretary Treasurer on behalf of the board, will be able to engage in funding support letters for the minor capital programs. And then, of course, the PDR, the project development reports, will be coming back to the board before proceeding in any specific direction on the Ladysmith once they're done and they're well on their way. So happy to answer any questions, but really positive news.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Walsh on this one? All right, I'm seeking someone to move the recommendation, please. Chantel, and a seconder, please. Leanne Lee seconded. Thank you. Oh, no, sorry. I saw it. Yeah, hold on. Y'all went way too fast. First person was actually Leanna Pellegrin. Sorry about that, guys. Chantel, if you could read the recommendation for me, please.
Okay, the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68 in Nanaimo Ladysmith give all 3 readings of the capital bylaw number 2023/2020 or 2023 /24 CPS D 68-01 in one meeting and adopt capital plan bylaw number 2023/24 CPS D 68-01.
Would you like to motivate?
I think it's great news, and I believe that we should be all voting yes on this one. It would
Does
be
anyone want
foolhardy
us-
to say no.
Would anyone like to speak to this? Yes, the seconder is Leanna Pellegrin. Thanks, Greg. I just want to say thank you, staff. Oh, Greg, you can speak. You want to speak, so you go first.
Thank you, Chair. You were just about to say what I wanted to say, so I might be able to jump the gun here. It's just to really thank staff for all the efforts that they put in to help make this year's capital request come to fruition. I think this is really amazing for Ladysmith, and really looking forward to what will be accomplished to sort of transform education in Ladysmith, and really working with that community to make it happen. So I'm really looking forward to that work in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I just want to briefly echo what Greg just said. As someone who was the zone rep in Ladysmith and who was on the LRFP subcommittee for Ladysmith in the last part of last term, this is just extremely exciting, and this will really, really mean a great deal to the Ladysmith community, the area of our district. And it's a really great way to continue to build some bridges there. And it's another sign of what great work staff did with the recommendation that we have the LRFP committee, and how well it's working. So just thank you to staff, and thank you for everyone for this work. And I look forward to seeing this progress. All right. Chantel, this is great news, and thank you to staff for all their hard work in getting all this to this point. All right. So seeing all that, I can imagine I know the answer to this, but is there anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, it carries unanimously. Thank you. And now 8.6, Mr. Walsh with an LRFP update.
Thank you, Chair. And so Ms. Matthews is just going to bring up the document starting on page 70. So last year, kind of celebrating the first year of the implementation of the Long Range Facilities Plan, we provided a brief update on how things were going. And so we've done that again this year with some of the highlights of the additional processes that have occurred. And so we thought we'd go relatively quickly through them. But again, as with the kind of audit recommendation and the motion, we thought it was a good time with the capital plan response letter just to highlight you know, the connections and the fact that the plan is being lived in the way that we're applying for funds, in the projects that we're proceeding with, in the projects that we're being successfully funded for. And so we thought we would go through that quickly. So again, the recommendations are there, and we've talked about them a lot, but recommendation 1, long-term capacity issues. And so there's been a couple of fairly significant consultations in the North End and Ladysmith, ND as well. North End, you'll see there's a motion coming in, I believe, the next agenda item that's going to be leading to hopefully the next stage of addressing North End capacity issues. And then the Ladysmith, of course, we're getting an expansion at Ladysmith Primary to take care of capacity issues and seismic at intermediate. So big news there. The school site acquisition charge is implemented, finally starting to bring in some dollars, because there was kind of a delay in when we could collect because of the amount of projects that were in before we put in the charge. Still, we haven't removed it yet, but we're not, Karen, if I could get you to scroll down just a smidge. Oh, no, yeah, just to 3 and 4. So still not seeking a Crown grant at this time, but if the need came up in the appropriate area, we could seek that. Design and cost permanent annexes builds with portables. And so this is that idea that if we have portable cities at places, you think of Eno, you think of Quarterway, you think of Departure Bay. Is there something that we could do to bring them together in a kind of meaningful way if we think they're going to be more permanent? Not proceeding in a big way there. We don't really have the local capital to support that, to support what contribution we'll have to do with Ladysmith, to support whatever contribution ND might require to move portables to ND as an example. Schools with immediate and medium term for expansion. So you'll see this year, we requested departure bay, although it didn't get it, but Ladysmith did. ND has been requested, and as well as we'll add Wellington to that list. Land for future growth, and so Bayview is an example where we had an opportunistic acquisition of a small parcel of land next to the school, in our smallest school from a acreage perspective, not quite torn down yet, but soon the school will have access to more play space, which is much needed, particularly as it continues to grow. So a lot of successes in that area. So if you go to the next page, Karen. Many of these items haven't necessarily moved much more than they were in the past. So for instance, the prioritization of the upgrade of NDSS continues to be focused on by the board. The ministry is very much aware of the desire, and as tough as the process has been with respect to NDSS, I don't think there's anyone in our community that's not behind the board in trying to find a solution that's going to end up with a new great upgraded facility. So there's some positives there for sure. So as you go through the report, again, you'll see we're talking about jurisdiction on recommendation 13 on the next page. Jurisdictional kind of fairness. You'll definitely see projects across the district being supported, both in our application process and then the ministry's final approvals. And the same thing is happening in our annual facilities grants. Our HVAC upgrades are almost done. Ladysmith Intermediate is having the solution that we talked about, and so we are going to be, I don't know how many districts, but when you think about the COVID preparedness and just air quality more generally, we're really in a really good spot for a school district, particularly with one with so many old buildings. And so really want to recognize Mr. Sabo's work and his team. Recommendation 16, we'll talk a little bit about in a minute. And I think that the board should be taking full credit, because the board's goal was to advocate for additional annual facilities grant funding, and lo and behold, it got like one of the largest boosts I've ever seen this year. So really positive news there. Again, I'm not sure our board was the decider in that, but certainly the ministry was aware and has listened to districts and our board's goal to address that issue. So I'm going to move on to recommendation 20. Again, here's an example of the board putting its money where its goals are. And so a couple of years ago, there was some surplus. The board put it into gardens, outdoor learning spaces. It's taken us a little while because of just people power. We just don't have enough people to do the work. However, it continues. There's still funding in our local capital pot, and I think you continue to hear even last week about school gardens getting implemented, and so we continue to proceed with this recommendation, and the financial support of the board focusing on meeting its goals was important in that. Active transportation is increasingly part of the discussion, and we're looking at what a policy might look at with respect to that. Going to turn to recommendation number 26, 27, 28, and you'll just see here is a couple of examples where we've essentially either completed or we reported to the board they weren't required anymore, and took those recommendations out. Rather than renumber though to create confusion, to alleviate confusion, we thought we would just keep them in. And then I'll just finally go to recommendation number 32, and you'll see that's the longest one, but it is talking about the board's commitment to aligning, we talk about capital a lot, but we're putting money into capital for health, safety, but for education. And so, one of the main big upgrades recently has been the Dover Bay expansion. And so we just asked for a little bit of an overview about the kind of infrastructure and how it aligns with the board's goal of creating flexible and cross-curricular spaces. And again, we heard a little bit about that, I think, from the school. And so there's examples there to show our community that the board is really doing a very good job, we think, meeting the goals of the long-range facilities plan. So happy to answer any questions, and our goal is to continue to update probably around this time on a yearly basis of how we're doing, and until we've crossed them all off our list and need to make a new plan.
Thank you very much, Mark. It is great work, and it's good to see how much progress we've made. Mark Robinson with a question.
Thank you, Tanya, or Chair. Thank you, Mark, Pete, and everyone who worked on this report. I like the way it's laid out. It's quite dynamic and stands out, and hats off. My question is about Rutherford. Specifically, I'm looking at for the traffic signs. I didn't really see a traffic sign for it. Mark, is this dependent on what comes out of the next motion on the agenda?
Sorry, can you just, which number, sorry?
Oh, I'm referring to all the traffic signs and how they are really well laid out. I didn't see anything particularly on Rutherford. I'm asking if if it was left out because it's up to what we decide on the next item on the agenda, Mark.
Sure. So in alignment with recommendation number 1, there's a link to the North End consultation, which embeds what happened there. So the next item is directly linked to Rutherford, and then our report about Rutherford will come in May, dependent on the next item, and then of course depending on the direction that the board wants to go. But I can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But yes, we anticipate that, and I can give the timing when the next item comes up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Do I have any other questions for Mark on this item? All right, seeing none, we will move to 8.7 International Student Elementary School Program.
Thank you, Chair. So this, as noted, is very directly connected to the board's direction to look at to decide the year of the Rutherford reopening. And so what staff have been doing is reviewing our numbers, of course, and we're a little bit softer at the elementary levels, which is not a complete surprise if you base it off of the anticipated Beauregard numbers, but it is a little surprising in the sense that continued growth and building is actually, it hasn't slowed too much. So we've had our external consultants continue their update of our numbers, and we continue to show heavy growth in the north up to past 2030. But again, if we don't have the kids in the schools, there's not a heck of a lot of reason that you would take action years in advance of the kids actually arriving. But what we are facing is Randerson is full to the point where we're now refusing students that are moving into the neighborhood unless there's a little spot where kindergartners can still get in. But if you're a grade 3, I believe, and you move into Randerson right now, we do not have space for you. And so we have, 5 portables at Departure Bay and a number of portables at McGurr and a portable at Ney and a couple of portables at Randerson. And so we're getting to the place where, number one, to buy portables, particularly if ND is going to need them, doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense, because now you're throwing away whatever 100,000 to either buy a new one or spending all this money to move them. We're tight in schools like Randerson, where people do want to get into or move into the neighborhood and expect to be able to access their neighborhood school. But the numbers are not so overwhelming that you go, let's open tomorrow. So what we've determined is, Rutherford, the closure of Rutherford has saved millions of operational dollars for this district to be able to pump back into educational programming. But as we do hit those numbers, and we can see the growth with our eyes, and schools are still full, even though they're not maybe quite as over capacity as we were expecting, is that we anticipate the need to open Rutherford, and that's what the board has reported. What those staff has been looking at is that 2024, is that 2025? And what we came to the determination is that there's two impacts if kids continue to not show up quite in the numbers that we expected. One is that if we open Rutherford, it's going to cost us between $400,000 and $600,000 of operating dollars per year. Leave aside the desks to get the school open. So if enrollment's continuing to grow, that's great. It pays for itself. But if enrollment doesn't continue to grow, then we are going to have to find that money from somewhere else. So what we're proposing to the board in this particular memo is that we would like to start to expand access to elementary school international education programming, which is relatively common in a lot of the metro districts and some other districts, but not that common here. And what it would allow us to do is then we would be able to look at opening Rutherford at kind of at the earliest date, and then invite international students or start, promoting the program internationally, and then being able to place them in the in-demand schools. So it creates space at McGirt, create space at NAIT, create space at Departure Bay, create space, not right away, but maybe in a couple of years at Randerson, and then obviously have space at Rutherford. And it would take basically, what is that number? 70, 80, if we had 80 kids, it would more than pay for the school reopening. And then as the school becomes populated and the neighborhoods become populated with domestic kids, you then start giving less and less space to international students as we move. So we probably wouldn't have 80, but we'd certainly have some to support enrollment at those schools. And so based off of the numbers, and we're going to again be coming back in May with a report, depending on what this says, to say, yes, it's 2024, or yes, it's 2025, and this is what that process looks like. So that's a bit of a different discussion because we don't have that in front of you, but that's the reason for the recommendation. And what staff don't want to do is, because theoretically we can expand access to international seats in our elementary schools. But we want the board to be aware that there could be a situation, and we'll be very, very careful, but there could be a situation where you have 3 grade 4s in the international program, and they're going to stay for grade 4, 5, 6, 7. And all of a sudden you have a big influx of kids living next door to Frank Ney. And there's grade 6s that want to come to the school, but there might not actually be space for them if we did that. And so that's a risk that we're going to be very careful with, but that is the potential there. And so what we don't want to say to the community is, great, we're going to reopen Rutherford, there's space for everyone, don't worry. We want to be very clear that we're being very careful about our finances, not making a decision that's going to, cause an educational, cuts to educational programming, but there is potential risks associated with it. The last risk, of course, is that if we proceed to open Rutherford, say in 2024, and it's predicated on the idea that it's going to be partially funded through international increase, that's pretty fast to create an robust elementary program. So there's a risk that if we don't get domestic enrollment growing as much as we need it to, and we don't attract international students, we will be looking at the impact on educational programming to fund the school that's open. So apologies for the long-windedness there, but it's the first step in the next report that will be coming in May.
Okay, I do see Mark Robinson that you'd like to move the motion, but I'm gonna ask you to hold off on that because I see quite a question from Chantel.
Great. I guess he could motivate the motion and then we could discuss motion, or
You could put it, but if it's an actual question, I'd prefer to do it early.
great, sounds good. I'm wondering about, so international students, for some reason in my head, I have this idea that it's a short term. Sorry, through you, Chair, to Mark Walsh. I see international students as being sort of a temporary thing, but it sounds like they might stay longer. So am I correct in understanding that? How does that work? Like, I always just think of like, okay, our international, it's like a the other kind of students. I think these are two different kinds
Yeah.
of students, right? So if you could kind of
100%. So the I guess the financial benefit, but also the community benefit to the elementary school program is these are often students moving in with family, or their mom or their dad or both moved to Canada, but they're not ordinarily resident for the purposes of funding by the Ministry of Education for whatever reason. Maybe they become at some point. So, but these children often will stick their entire elementary school career. This is not an experiential program for them. This is likely their permanent state of being. And so they just, they're really they're residents, but not funded residents. That's really the difference. And so, but occasionally that's not the case. Sometimes they'll go back, but for the most part, that's what would happen is they would come in grade 5 and they would stay for grade 6, 7. They would come and stay in high school as well. And again, on occasion, particularly given the robust levels of immigration we have in this country right now, it's very possible that some of them could convert from being international to domestic. But yes, the secondary programs are often more experiential. I'm coming for a year, I'm coming for 2. I may come to graduate, but I'm not likely coming for 5.
Great. So yeah, it sounds like more it's like the parents came in on a visa, work visa usually, and they're there. And yeah, most people want to stay. So usually they get their permanent residency and they get to stay and then they get funded. So interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see a question from Naomi.
Mine's just a follow-up to the international question. You mentioned through you, Chair, to Secretary Treasurer Walsh, you mentioned that the elementary international programs have been happening more in metro areas. Do we have like numbers of how many elementary students are attending schools in those areas?
So I, through you, Chair, I have not had the personal opportunity to be at some of the meetings that other staff have been, but like at a district maybe a little bit bigger than us, as an example, I won't name them. I don't know how much information they share, but so 220 to 400. It really also depends on the demographic. So an example would be, I am a national of country X and I own a home in Vancouver, as an example. But I'm not a permanent resident of Canada, but I can afford to live in Vancouver in the house that I have, and I'm bringing my child over with me. They're still an international student in that example. So there's a much more of that, I think, on the mainland. But yeah, so we're talking, I think if our program could reach 100, that's probably a good number for us if we could get there.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions before we move to the motion? Seeing none, Mark, would you like to move it? Read it, please. Robinson.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. The Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District 68 and I'm Ladysmith approve the expansion of the International Student Elementary School program.
Do we have a seconder, please? Seconded by Chantel. Thank you. All right. Would anyone well, first of all, Mark, would you like to motivate?
Briefly, thank you, Chair. Yeah, last year on June 8th, the school board made a motion that passed to reopen Rutherford. That was applauded by the community, and a lot of people in the area were happy, myself included. However, now it's come to light that there might be some financial challenges. This addresses that. So thank you to staff for helping us address that. I am mindful of potential impacts in programming long term. However, I think I felt good reading the report, knowing that it would be conceivably a temporary solution as we build up students in Rutherford. So my kids go to Randerson. I can attest it's packed. McGurr is packed, and Frank Jane is packed, and we need it. So that's why I'm made the motion. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Mark. And Chantel would like to speak.
Yes, I'd like to speak in motion, sorry, in agreement to the motion. I do have, obviously, I know that staff will be very careful, especially making sure that there are ELL supports. They are difficult positions to fill, so hopefully we start, trying to hire right now so we can have that for, a year or two down the road. That would be fantastic. And I know that they'll keep that in mind when they're doing these planning that for the future. So thank you very much for everybody, to all the staff for thinking of this as a potential, sort of shorter, longer term solution to this. Thank you very much.
All right. Does anyone else want to? Oh, Greg, you'd like to comment, and then I'd like to comment before I call the question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I appreciate the work that staff has put into this to bring it forward before the committee this evening. One thing I'd like to say is that I think it's a good opportunity not only to help support Rutherford or other elementary schools, but also to enrich the experience that our students have in our system. And for that reason, I support the motion and look forward to what comes ahead in terms of the possibilities of supporting the program. So thank you.
Okay, I'm on the list as well. I would just like to say that I strongly support this. For our newer trustees, one thing I can say for sure is being in the district and being on the board during COVID and seeing other districts who were really, really hurt by the drop in international due to travel restrictions. Our district did a really good job, and we've always managed our international program really well, such that we didn't hit that same kind of wall, because we have such a strong team managing our finances, and they've always been very good at letting us know, hey, we're getting at risk here, being over reliant on this. I have tremendous confidence in this recommendation, because I know how well our staff does this work, and if they wouldn't be recommending it if they believed that there was reason to be concerned. So this is, I think, something that really will serve the needs of the district, will, as Greg said, be a great opportunity for our students to have an enriching experience. I know that there was the international program at Rutherford just before it closed, and I got to observe it, and it was so good for the kids, and it was such a great experience both for the international kids and our ELL kids, and for the kids who were English first language. Is just amazing. So I just cannot say enough what a great idea I think this is, and how much I think it meets the needs of everyone. The families who are looking forward to Rutherford opening as soon as possible, for the families who would like to come to an international program. And so anyway, I just strongly encourage us to support this. All right. Seeing no further requests to speak, I will seek to call the vote. Is there anyone opposed to the motion as presented? Seeing none, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. 8.8, Mr. Walsh and Tanya Sutton, Director of Finance, regarding our preliminary budget.
Great, thank you, Chair. So another item that I would say that we as a school district should be feeling relatively fortunate this evening. And so this item is, I guess, not necessarily the preliminary base budget, but it's the preliminary of the preliminary. So what we've now managed to do is complete all of our assumptions. So our enrollment our international program, what we think of various categories of students that we anticipate will be there, and then taken the funding announcements from the government and applied those numbers to those students, particularly and importantly with respect to increases in salaries that are significant this year for our unionized employees. We don't quite know what that looks like for exempt and principal and vice principal as of yet. And so we've taken these numbers to create a budget. So the other piece is, and I want to go through this very, very briefly. And so the highlight would be that with the exception of 2 items, we are looking at minimum at a balanced budget without looking at service reductions. But I do want to highlight that where a school, as an example, loses 20 kids. These 20 kids are just left grade 7 and we didn't get the same amount of kindergartners as an example, we would just be looking at an automatic reduction of a teacher. So we don't come to the board to suggest that that is a cut, although that is one less position that would be in that school as the circumstances. But that's like an automatic thing that happens year to year. Just like you'll see there's additional teacher FTE that we're anticipating because of our increased secondary enrollment and a bit of increased international enrollment at secondary as well. So just like we don't say, hey, board, we want 5 more teachers. It just happens because of the way that our formulas work. So if there's a school that's impacted and says, well, wait a second, you are laying off someone here, that is very possible, but it's not as a result of a board decision that changes a formula that cuts a position. The second area, though, is that there are one-time areas. So the board spent money on services or programs in September. With surplus dollars, as an example, they would also be removed unless we chose to maintain them. An example I guess I could give is the I guess now famous North Oyster Crossing Guard. There is $12,000 that we built into the budget rather than have the board do a surplus year to year until the kind of active transportation is complete. And then the final one would be if we had a program that was intended to run for 2 years, as an example, and then the program ceased. So our bus driver or bus seatbelt pilot program. So federal government wanted to see how seatbelts were functioning on buses and gave us money to hire our people to monitor that. Those funds are gone, and so the positions that are incumbent with those funding would also just automatically disappear. Of course, in the facilities world, there's so much going on that we can take anyone that will want to come join us, frankly. So that's a bit of the highlight. And so you'll see on page 80, we're talking about, a reminder of how much of what we do is staff driven. So 91% of our expenses essentially. And so they've all been adjusted to reflect increased costs of staff. And then of course our revenues conversely have been adjusted to reflect our increased revenues from the ministry for the grants that are coming. We've had a couple of other collective agreement shifts. We've had the new permanent stat day with reconciliation, a statutory holiday, and a couple of other items that are there for the board on page 2 to review. Really, the main one to see the kind of adjustments would be on page 83 that are relatively robust in the what we've kind of declined in financial ability to support or what we've increased and why those changes have occurred. So I'll leave those ones for questions when the board comes or when the time comes. The big outstanding item for us right now is exempt compensation. So we're seeing that CUPE and teachers are going to get well over 6% when the COLA is and maybe Ms. Sutton, you can jump on to remind us exactly what percentage that is when you have a moment. Oh,
Good evening through the chair. Yeah, the COLA is 1.25 on top of the 5.5% that was already provided. And actually on top of the 3.24 that was added since the annual amended budget was shown to the board. So it's a significant increase that this budget is accounting for.
And so typically exempt increases align with our unionized staff, and they largely did last year. Now, at this point, however, we do not know how much that will be, and we also do not know how much will be funded. So I think we've all heard a number of times the intention to support exempt increases, but that has not been announced. It is not a guarantee, and we don't know that number. So the big unknown is if say exempt staff are going to receive the same as the teachers in CUPE and we don't receive any funding for that, well then we would be in a deficit. We potentially looking at a deficit position there. But at this time we don't want to raise panic because we really, we expect that number is so significant to boards that the ministry would be providing some sort of funding. But until we know that number, we've got a little bit budgeted it in for that, but not that 6.75%. And until we know the number, it's difficult to finalize our budget on those terms. So we're hoping to have that prior to the absolute budget for presentation, because if we'd have a hard choice to make about how much we're going to budget for an increase if we don't know how much we're allowed to increase exempt salaries, as well as we don't know how much we're going to get from the ministry. So huge question mark at this point. The last thing that I'll point out is I'll point out a slight disappointment and a slight and a large benefit to the district. First is the disappointment. So we had the privilege of negotiating with our CUPE partners some really great benefits to both staff as well as the educational outcomes for kids with what we call the table monies. So some of it went to EA hours, some of it went to, getting hard to fill jobs, additional funds, etc. And we anticipated that would be a dollar value above and beyond the block that we receive. So above and beyond the amount that the government has given us per student. Unfortunately, it's turned out that that's not the case. We've been informed. And so that's money that had we had, of course, we could have spent on other priorities of the board. But unfortunately, it's not. It's in the block. But it's not a complete surprise. It's just we anticipated it to come in a different way. On the other hand, however, is the really large increase in the annual facilities grant. And the annual facilities grant is actually appropriate to support planning staff if we need. So if we had an operational planner like that we funded from our operating budget, we theoretically could reallocate that position to annual facilities grant. And we're just looking at that right now on how that could work. And then the final matter, and we're only still getting information on it, is the food program. So it's I've got to better remember the acronym, but the funding food for students, and that's a large number, $1.6 million that we're going to get, and we are able to reallocate some of those funds to fund currently existing programming. So for instance, if we have a cafeteria assistant as an example at ND, we could take some of the 1.6 and we could put it to that to be able to use that operating dollars on another, priority of the district. And so again, we're very tight because we're not growing very much from a per student basis. So we are very much on the line. But we are able to do some reallocations when it comes to that as well. And we're getting some final information from the ministry. So high level it's reasonably good news, I think, for us. I know the board will always want more funding from the ministry. But we are not going to be looking at reductions, and we're really, really hopeful we're going to get more information on exempt salaries very soon. And of course, we'll be back to the board reporting out a little bit more on the feeding student fund soon. So hopefully that was high level, but in depth, and happy to answer any questions. So as a preliminary budget, I think we have the next steps posted And maybe Karen, after questions, we could just bring that document up to remind folks what the date of the next steps are for our budget process.
Oops.
So happy to answer questions
Chantel.
first, because I put Ms.
Chantel,
Matthews
I
on the
see, has a
spot.
question.
No problem. Thank you, Mark, for this preliminary base budget. It's fantastic. It's super exciting to hear too that they increased funding for special needs categories by like 12%, 9% for Indigenous education. It's really quite a hefty increase of funding that's been happening, and I'm really excited to see that. I am curious, however, when it comes to EAs, of course, why it's a -2 in that category. Is that very, very preliminary? Yeah.
Yeah, so through you, Chair. So on page 82, you'll see our funded FTE, our preliminary numbers are suggesting that our level 1 is down by 2, level 2 is down by 18, level 3 is down by 6 or 16. So that's just it's a yearly in and out. So, but the problem is we do not determine that kids are going to be there unless we know they're going to have IEPs, as an example. So what this is saying is, we know that there's a whole bunch of grade 12s leaving, and we know some kids that are just moving. And based off of those projections, we're going to be minus these numbers. So as additional IEPs come in and designations come in the fall, these numbers will tick up. But what we're saying is the problem is if we overestimate our enrollment, just like it was in elementary school, or just like this year in our in our distributed learning program, we far overestimated enrollment, had the associated staffing already issued, and it's incredibly difficult to pull back that staffing once it's issued. So when kids come, there'll be more EA funding, and inevitably there is. And in fact, this decline is slightly smaller than previous years, as I recall, but this is quite normal.
Follow-up question. So, okay. I would argue that we never have enough EAs, no matter what. So like we look at it, we're looking at about 750, just spitballing real quick numbers here, and we have 272 EAs listed for the 2023-2024 budget. I'm just curious why we're going with enrollment numbers specifically and not go with need numbers. Especially considering we got a 12% raise in there. We actually have a bit of a surplus even with the lower numbers.
So maybe I'll ask Ms. Sutton to come on and talk a little bit about how the formula is driven, because it's not completely FTE driven. We have a contingency that just gets given out to address need. So it's not one kid like one student equals an EA, because it's not like that in a school. But at the same time, we can't spend money that we don't have. So if we're projecting 10, we know there needs to be support for 11. We can't project revenue that's not there yet. But maybe if I could ask Ms. Sutton to walk through a relatively complex topic that might deserve its own presentation at some point, but at a high level
I think it
would be
yeah.
appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Through the chair. So EA staffing is all formula driven, and it's fairly historical, where particular designations generate a particular number of hours, which mean a position, so to speak. Some of the categories drive a smaller number of hours. Some of the categories don't actually drive any historically because they're unfunded categories, yet we have altered our formula over the last year to include include those categories to drive some hours to increase our overall base, so that we're not doing a annual drop in EA hours, which we have been historically, and like you see the -2 in the past, it's been significantly more than that. We add it back in the fall when those numbers come back up. But basically what we do is we take the current cohort of designated students and say out the grade 12s, move everybody through the system, leaving the Ks 0 in the end and the beginning, because we don't know what that's going to look like. And we don't know if they're going to get IEPs in time for September funding. So it's a careful navigation in the preliminary budget, and those positions are generally always added back in. Our learning services department gets a bucket of hours for which to staff the schools. They then do that by that need that you were referring to. And then when the fall numbers come in, we recalculate, provide an additional amount of hours per the actual designations that we have. And then we readjust that figure, give them additional hours, and then fall staffing takes place. So it's just it is a careful navigation to make sure that we don't overstaff in a preliminary nature, but we're actually also providing supports to the students that come into the system that actually need the support. Hopefully that's.
And just to add as well, and I'm not sure, Tanya, whether you can easily access like last year as a comparator, but as noted on page 84, we've been slightly less conservative in the estimates, which has had a less of an impact on a reduction, because that number can be as high as 10, 12, 14, depending. Now that's often because we had a big cohort leaving and an unknown cohort coming in, but we've tried to eliminate a bit of the swing, but it's not completely eliminated, as you could see.
Okay.
And I don't have that information now. I could potentially bring that back to a subsequent meeting if that.
Yeah, I think a different meeting with like a presentation just on that would be great, because that's something that you know, is top of mind of everybody. I think when it comes to supports for students in our schools, you know, teachers and everybody are also asking for it. So thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot, and hopefully that helps the public as well to understand better.
And just to note, Chantel, I just made a note. I just fired off a quick request to Karen to remind me to talk to Mark about us doing something in the future, some ideas about things we've done in the past to help trustees understand some of these issues and the formulas and the finances, and we can get into a bit more so that everybody is on the same sort of level playing field around their understanding of how all this stuff works. So maybe a work session or something. Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our list is Jeff Vertanen from CUPE.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have a question about actually seeking clarity on the table money comment about the CUPE bargaining. I don't know what page it's on the agenda, but it's on page 6 of the information sheet. It's the last paragraph just before the summary. And it took me a few reads because I was having a hard time getting it. So I'm hoping to get some clarity on what Mark was talking about earlier about that.
Sure. Jeff, can I just ask when you printed your copy? Was it before this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay, so just so the public is aware, we made a small edit to this to take out a little bit of language with respect to criticism of this exact issue. So what I mean is our understanding of the table money. So Jeff, do you have that number at the top of your mind? Otherwise, I'll get Tanya to pop in for year one. For
year one?
Yeah.
For 3 years, it was about 1.1 million or 1.2 million. So
divide that by approximately 3. So we're talking about $350,000. What we were understanding from BCPC, and then we thought from the ministry, was that we were going to get essentially a grant that said, hey, school district, we told you were going to get this much in year 1, this much in year 2, and this much in year 3. Here is your grant for this year, separate and aside from the per student allocation. And then, so that's what we were waiting for. But then subsequently, we found out that that number is within the block. So what they're saying is, we've given you that money. Like they're not saying they're not giving it to us. They're saying we've given it to you, but we're not giving it to you as a separate number. So when we receive it, we can't point to this, you know, $6 in the block is for that. It's here's your money, and then you just need to follow, you know, your commitments you made at the bargaining table. And so to note, I mean, we're only up, you know, a few kids this year, yet we're still looking at a balanced budget. So they certainly did, you know, adjust the block. So it's there. It's just we thought it would be even more money on top of the block, and it didn't turn out to be that.
Follow up. Thank you, Madam Chair. That last comment, I think that's where I'm still kind of confused, because when I read this, I actually got a hold of our counterparts and saying, what's going on here, right? And they're like, and it was explained to me that we did actually get the money, but you're right, it went into general coffers, it wasn't earmarked.
Yes, we did get the money.
What was the extra dollars then that you referred to?
Sorry, the extra dollars I was referring to is we were expecting an entirely separate grant above the per student allocation. So we thought we were going to get another 350,000 or whatever that number is above the block to fund this, and we didn't.
Okay, but they did fund the table money.
Absolutely, the table money is within the block, but we were cautiously optimistic that there was another $350,000 coming, but there's just not.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mark Robinson, question.
Thank you, Tanya. Through you to Mark Walsh. I'm just reading the report. It reads, you know, it says, if they do not work, then we may not wish to continue. I'm looking for clarification. If they do not work, does this mean if we don't get enough students? This is on page 2 of their action sheet at the top. If they do not work, it means the programs, but is this referring to if we don't get enough students?
I'm sorry,
Or children, sorry?
where? Page 2 of the action sheet, so page 81 of the agenda?
Page 87 at the top.
Page 87.
Nope, that's a different item number, Mark. It's
We're
a
on
different-
item.
No, you're on the
No,
wrong item.
You're on, yeah, we're still looking at the preliminary budget. You're looking at the childcare.
Aha. Second time I've done this week. Thank you.
It happens. All right. All righty. So you have another question? No. Okay. Naomi.
Hi. So I'm going to echo Chantel's what I heard. Maybe it was a bit of frustration with the -2 figure, and we've had an increase in our EA funding. I guess my concern always is this. I think Tanya mentioned it. Sutton mentioned it as well. That you know, with the Ks coming in, we don't always have IEPs and stuff for them, so therefore there hasn't been a designation. So potentially those, not potentially, but more often than not, the IEPs won't get written until after September. And we know September 30th is a deadline to be able to submit our numbers, right? I'm just wishing there was some other way that this could be done, because if we've got this increase in funding, my concern lies with hiring EAs. We're having problems getting EAs to begin with. And when we decide that we have more students than what we've budgeted for, therefore we need more, to me it doesn't make sense to wait when we know we have that money in the budget. Do you know what I'm saying, Mark? Like
Yes. Now, sorry, do you want to ask a question, then I can respond, or do you want me to kind of respond?
Just respond. It was more like it was a question, kind of a comment.
Well, and I through you, Chair, so perhaps it would be a good idea for us to go away and come back with a report specifically on how we fund supports for special needs, because in fact the board funds supports far in excess of what we receive in funding for these students. So what you see on page 81 or page 80, sorry, you know, what you see, like, here's how much funding we get to support children with diverse learning needs. Well, we support them. We add operating dollars unallocated, like unassociated with that funding to those students. So we already do kind of provide extra and upfront, in fact. So it's just that the number is so large that when we do, you know, have less kids projected, that's why we pull back. But we don't, it's not only funding aligned with supporting children with diverse needs that supports them. So so it might be a good idea, like I said, for us to go away and say, here's all of our expenditures on children with diverse learning needs, and here's the impact of enrollment of those students on that pot, because it does impact it, but it's relatively minor in the scheme of the overall support for those students.
Okay.
And the other thing, and it's more of it would be more of a carry coming to education, is that just to be clear, that the kids in kindergarten that are not designated but we know are going to be or need supports, they are looking at supports for kids with diverse learning needs as a broad umbrella. And so, you know, Kid X has a designation, doesn't mean that Kid X gets 24 hours of support, or 24 hours a week of support. That's not how that would work. They just drive funding. They're going to, at the school level and at the district level, determine how they're going to support all students with needs.
Yeah, I get that. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff Bertanen, was there something you wanted to add?
No, not right now, Madam Chair. Maybe at the end of the meeting, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Sorry. Sorry about that. I accidentally muted myself. All right, seeing nothing further on the preliminary budget. Thank you for that report, Mark. Our final item is Mark, Jackie Poulin, our assistant superintendent, and Diane McGonigal, our district principal, around before and after school programs, or the pilot program. Thank
you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to take this item, but I think the work on this needs to be credited to Diane and Jackie, so that's why they're on here. So the board will remember, the board the last meeting of last year passed a motion that we start exploring a pilot project for final approval, or a pilot project to provide before and after school care at a site at cost recovery basis. I believe we've attached that report as a link. And then we provided an update relatively recently about our progress, and now we are seeking approval of the board to proceed to indeed engage in that pilot. And so you'll see there's two motions, and I'll maybe just address the basis for the first one and then talk about the second. So the first one is just seeking approval to proceed with one caveat. And so that's and I just want to be clear, is I think CUPE have been amazing partners. They've got great resource both locally and provincially to help, I think, districts walk through some of these issues. And so we're ready to roll at two sites, at Hammond Bay and at Pleasant Valley. And I think, again, we've updated a little bit why we're contemplating that. And the subject to the agreement with CUPE that the pilot's on a without prejudice basis, the intention there is just to say that before and after school care is not the work of the school district. And, you know, we want this to work, and we hope this is going to be replicatable, and it's going to, not take resources from the K-12 system, etc. But in the event that it doesn't, or in the event that funding doesn't work and we're having to subsidize it from other ways and can't proceed or don't want to proceed, that it would be on a without prejudice basis, somewhat similar to the the seamless day program. So that's the thinking there. And the reason we are hoping that happens now before we have the staffing quite finished, worked out, is because in order to get it to make it successful, we need to start advertising. And so waiting till the May board meeting when we might have that last, logistical piece finished, it'll be too late to make sure it's going to be a success for September. The second item, and I think this is an issue that the board has raised a number of times, and just something that we have been running into as we've been organizing and talking about programming, is our district is very much committed to diversity and inclusion. And one of the problems in running a cost recovery before and after school care is if you have a student that has some diverse needs, that needs kind of a lesser number of students around them or a higher adults to student ratio, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to make that work without external funding mechanism, which we do not, with the exception of minor, hours, do we have really access to that. And the difficulty for a district is if it takes this programming on and we're committed to diversity and inclusion, we are concerned that we're going to start to be asked to be subsidizing programs for a very good reason, to support, full accessible childcare or before and after school care, but at the detriment of our K-12 programming, which is not, at this point, the other aspect is not our mandate. And so we thought it was important to bring this to the board's attention, and again, assumed, given what we've heard from the board, that this would be something that the board would be interested in advocating on. So I think one is we want to get moving in the final advertising and the final organization of the pilots, and two is we can already see a hiccup that we're hoping that politically the board will take on.
All right, question from Chantel.
Hi, thank you. Of course, question for me. So the cost recovery. So basically what's been decided is we're going to allow a certain set, tell me if I'm wrong here, this is how I'm envisioning it. And so I'm just trying to see if I'm understanding this correctly here, is that the spaces have been created, or a number of spaces have been created for these two schools. And so, there's been work with CUPE on staffing, proper ratios for the spaces that have been created. We're not going to talk about the humans, but we'll talk about them as spaces. And so and then that cost basically gets divided up between those spaces, and the families of those spaces pay that cost. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so the finalization of the actual programming is not done, but generally that would be the case. So it's not just, it would be the overhead and the cost of the facility and the cost of the main, all the costs associated with whatever the ratio is, the 12-to-1 or whatever that ratio is. That's what the basis of cost recovery would be off of. A typical before and after school program. I know that we have been in contact with external providers of funding to try to get support for additional hours or additional supports for students with diverse learning needs, because this is something that's obviously important. But we're running up against a situation where, if that is going to be the case, where it would not be a cost recovery model any longer.
So it'd be sort of more, sorry, follow-up question.
Yes.
So it would become more cost prohibitive if we were to include like one more staff person at the beginning of the year, so that we could have like better ratios right off the bat. Would that be too much, or are we set with our ratios? That's kind of what I'm trying to say here, is that as a set thing, that, okay, parents would be able to afford this sort of thing, but if we go any higher, then families it'd be too cost prohibitive, or
That is my understanding, but I don't necessarily have that level of detail. So I would need to get Diane or Jackie to come and talk about the exact math with respect to that.
I will probably have another question and comment at the end. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna do something I normally don't do and ask a question now rather than adding myself to the list because it pertains to this. In doing that, in asking Jackie and or Diane to come back and talk to us more about this in the future, where does the $10 a day childcare come in? Does it impact us, or is that a different program because that's full day daycare versus before and after school care? Can you?
Oh, I'm
Can we
good.
find?
I apologize.
Can we find out about that?
I'm going to have to come back with
Yeah,
those
I didn't
specific
expect you to know
details.
that off the top of your head.
Apologies.
I'm just curious if that's funded differently, you know, how that all comes
What I can
together.
say is that Diane particularly has been kind of leading the charge of shaking every bush on where we could get funding and supports, etc. Before and after school care, I don't think has quite the same support level yet, but again, I'm going to have to get that information
Okay.
back to the board. Now, I will say that these are recommended motions, so it's coming before the board. So we can certainly make sure that we have additional information in advance of the 26th available.
Okay, thank you. Mark Robinson.
Hi, Mark. Thank you, Chair. I'll ask the question again. On the top of page 80, the last page, the report mentions that if they do not work, they being the programs, what would cause it to not work? Would that be, for example, not having enough buy-in to it, or could it be something more like having students that we can't afford, like say a child that needs more supports? Thanks.
Sure. So through you, Chair. So I think if there was under enrollment in them as an example, if we started to face a situation where we couldn't fill absenteeism, and all of a sudden we're asking principals or central district staff to drive over to do before and after school care because we can't get other people to do it. If we, say the ministry chair, this is not going to happen. This is not a rumor. So just to be clear, say the ministry says, okay, well, all EAs are going to be now 40 hours a week. Not going to happen, to be clear. And then we've been relying on those folks to provide services. Well, where do we find those human resources? So, like, I'm not suggesting that the demand's not going to be there, and it's likely going to continue to be very valuable. But there is a possibility that the logistics of it or the demand of it, etc., is such that it becomes overwhelming. I will say that the organization of even the logistics of licensing has taken a significant amount of resourcing that would be K-12 focused, not money, but people that would be K-12 focused in preparing. I mean, you can see how many reports have been made to the board on this specific issue. So, but that's the idea.
Quick follow-up, Chair, if I may.
Yep.
As we're rolling out these daycare initiatives, are we having difficulty with staffing at all? We're finding that as a barrier?
Well, we haven't rolled out any yet. And so these pilots will be the first. And certainly I will say that, again, CUPE has had some excellent ideas to help us get through some issues that we find that licensing has, that timing in the day has, etc. And so again, we think we can do it, but we haven't experienced it in reality yet. I should say though, it has worked with the Seamless Day at Pleasant Valley so far.
Right. Clarification on my question. Other districts that have already started to roll it out, are we finding that to be mindful of, is what I'm asking?
Yeah, the districts that we've had some conversations of, there's been, I guess, a few hiccups, but no, they have worked, and we provided a couple of the different models that made it work, or that they're working under. We're not quite taking that the easiest model, I guess, we're not taking, because we are cognizant of the idea of getting EAs additional hours as a benefit. So we're not taking the same model as some places, but it seemingly should work.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All right, Naomi, question.
Okay, this one might already have been commented on or whatever. I was just curious as to why both these pilot schools that we're going to use are in the North End and we don't have one like maybe North End and South End. Like,
So 2 reasons. First, Hammond Bay is basically because it's going to have empty classrooms. So we're opening the school in a very tight area, like we're tight everywhere. And ironically, Hammond Bay, while it's waiting for the French cohort to fill up, is going to have some space. And we know that there's demand there as well. So it started off as a space issue, and then demand confirmed the need was there. Pleasant Valley is because that's where we located our Seamless Day program. And so we're already licensed. And so since we're already licensed, we thought, okay, it's not recreating the wheel at another facility. So that's the sole reason that it was organized the way that it was organized.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, does anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, Greg would like to move the motion. Before you do that, Greg, I just want to, oh, sorry, Chantel, go for it.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that Jeff actually had a comment.
Oh, sorry, Jeff, I forgot that I saw you too, and all right, Jeff, your comment. Apologies.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair, and I'll keep it really quick. I just want to thank everybody for this. This has been such I don't say a long process, but it's been a great process. I was actually at the meeting, as some of you were, when the first motion was made. I think it might have been by Charlene, and to see it go. And so I don't want to miss anybody, but I just really want to point out Jackie Poulin and Diane McGonigal. I know the work they've done. I know others have done lots of work too, but they've just done a lot of work on this. And I'm really excited about this. I'm like Mark, I don't see too many ways that this will fail. Of course, you never say never, but I mean, the demand is there. We're gonna have the workers there. We're gonna be able to offer it at a good, at a fair price. I think it's gonna be great. So I just wanted to thank everyone and just comment on all the good work. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other questions or comments before we move to the motions? Seeing none, before we proceed, I have a question for you, Mr. Walsh. Were you intending for these to be 2 separate motions or one single?
Through you
Two
to Madam Chair, two separate. They're definitely 2 different thoughts.
Thank you. Just confirming. Yeah. Yes, and from Tom, thank you for CUPE's collaboration on this. Yes, very much raise my hands to CUPE for your patience and your input and your ideas and energy around and getting us to where we are. This is very exciting. All right. Yes, Chantel, you can speak to the motion once it's moved. Greg, could you read the motion, please? And then, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Motion reads as follows, that the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve proceeding with a pilot before and after school program staffed by district staff on a cost recovery basis, subject to an agreement with CUPE, that the pilot is on a without prejudice basis at Pleasant Valley Elementary and Ecole Hammond Bay.
And that was seconded by Naomi. Would you like to motivate, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to start off by acknowledging that this has been a long time coming and started quite some time ago. And I'm pleased to see that we're finally getting to the point now where we're being asked to support the pilot program. So it's really great to see our ability to work closely with CUPE to come up to this agreement. And I really think that this will be a positive outcome and a program for our students and our community. And I really hope it's successful and it becomes a program that can be replicated at other sites across the district. And thank you. I will be speaking in favor of the motion.
Thank you very much. Chantel would like to speak to the motion.
It's actually a procedural question about this because this is a recommendation that
Yep.
goes to the board, correct?
Correct.
So this recommendation, we could change the wording now, or we can change it at the regular board meeting, correct?
I believe so. Mr. Walsh is our parliamentarian.
Yeah, so what I would expect would happen is that if this is passed as it is, then Tanya at the board meeting will read this motion as it is, and then it'll go to the board for consideration, and then an amendment could certainly be passed, but it would be moved as it's written, or moved as it's passed tonight, and then amended absolutely at the board meeting if someone so felt that was required.
I think I'll wait to amend
Okay.
the wording in that motion for the regular board meeting. I do
Okay.
fully support this 100%. I want to say that too and make that very clear that we do need before and after school care. So I will be supporting this motion.
Okay, Tom, I see you've raised your hand.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me. It's my first time speaking. I wanted to start with a question. Just wondering, we made allusion to it, but when exactly did this idea first come across a board table?
Mark, I want to say
That'd be to Mark.
20.
So through you, Chair, so certainly the board has been contemplating a childcare strategy for some time. I can't speak to exactly when that happened. The recommended motion came about last, or was it September? No, I believe it was last June, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Oh, sorry, September 28th, 2022. Yeah, but it was before that the board started talking about it, but it wasn't directed until that time.
So nothing was done in terms of preparation. It was all theoretical before that date.
Before the direction from the board to start the planning of the process, yeah, there's discussions, but no specific planning.
I'm just trying to put into, thank you for the answer, Mark, and again, Chair, just a comment to follow up. I just trying to put into context just how quickly this idea has gone from our board table to putting kids in rooms. This is a monumental task, a risk at all levels of government. We changed the name of the ministry. And I'm just really impressed with the idea that after something, we've always thought about the lack of childcare and how it should be connected to, K-12 schooling. It just makes sense. But man alive, when people started working on it, they really got it done. So I really, from the initiative out of the ministry, right down through staff and to our QP partners that are going to be there every day for the kids, I'm flabbergasted at how quickly you've taken this from concept to reality, and I look forward to its expansion. And I know there'll be growing pains, but man alive, taking that first step, I'm so proud of you, and thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. All right. Does anyone else wish to speak to it? Okay, just before I call the question, I'm just going to say, yes, it's interesting. It feels like it's for me as somebody who's been here so long, it feels like it's been really quick, and yet it feels like forever in other ways, because we've had so many good conversations about this, and it's just exciting to see it moving forward, and I will fully be supporting this recommendation. All right, seeing no further questions or no further comments, is there anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, it carries unanimously. And now I need a mover for the second recommendation. Hang on here. Mark Robinson and seconded by Chantel.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, go on.
Move that the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, advocate to the Ministry of Education with childcare for additional financial supports to cover the increased costs associated with providing accessible before and after school care.
Seconded by Chantel. And would you like to motivate?
I would like to thank Trustee Morvay for putting a lot onto my radar in the last little while. She's been a very strong advocate for inclusion in our district, and it is my absolute honor, privilege, and pleasure to move this motion because the province needs to put the money where its mouth is and help us make sure that each and every program that we want to roll out that they asked us to on many occasions are fully funded. So for that reason, I'm making this motion, and thank you for Trustee Morvay for the second.
Well said. Anyone else wish to speak to it? I just want to, okay, no. Chantel, do you want to say something?
Yes, if
Go
I
for it.
may.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's exactly it. The federal government and the provincial government have both committed to having actually inclusive of disability in their commitments to childcare. And so if they're going to have that, if they want to have that, they're going to have to fund it properly. And I really appreciate that we're going to be doing that. There are other ways that we can also make sure it's inclusive. But we can also ask the ministry to give us a little bit of the funding they got from the federal government to make it inclusive of disabilities. So that would be fantastic for us to do that. Thank you very much.
Well said. And I guess what I would say, just in general, one of my big pet peeves as a trustee is ministry saying to us, well, we want you to do this and we want you to do that, but not attaching money to it. And I think that it's important that we continue to do that advocacy to make sure that the ministry understands that if they want us to take on these things, they have to financially support it, and they have a responsibility to do that. So I hope that we will all support this motion. Okay. Is there any other comments before I call the question? Seeing unfunded. Tom, may I read that? Unfunded mandate is a wish list, nothing more. And I think that sums it up quite nicely. To give us, if the ministry wants to give us a mandate, and they should, I mean, I'm not opposed to the mandate. It needs to be funded. So, having said that, jumping off my soapbox, is there anyone opposed to the recommendation? Seeing no opposition, carries unanimously. Thank you. We have now completed all of our reports and we are nearing the end of our meeting. We have no correspondence, no unfinished business or no new business. We have no questions. Under for information, we don't have anything, but I did get a message from Mr. Vertanen that he would like to just quickly say something regarding the Ladysmith news that I didn't catch earlier, so I will just let him do that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for your indulgence. I'll keep it quick. I'm on this committee with a CUPE hat on, so I didn't want to speak during the news about the capital plan that Mark was talking about. But just quickly to put on town council hat, I can't put into words what this will mean to the residents of Ladysmith. I know, as Mark said, we're not fully out of the woods yet. There's still a few things to get through, but I mean, I talk to residents all the time, and everybody's they're just disbelieving, right? They're just like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. And that news today, so I just really want to quickly speak on it. I know the mayor and council is really looking forward to our meeting. I think it's next Thursday to maybe get a little bit deeper in the conversation, but man, oh man, that's great news. And yeah, might not seem like they've been excited yet because they're just not believing it yet. But boy, if that comes through, that's huge. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I suspected that you wanted to say something of that, which is why I strayed from our normal procedures. All right, we have trustee Naomi Bailey has made the motion to adjourn. Seconder. Do we need a second? I can't remember. Do we need a seconder for motion to adjourn? Yes, motion to adjourn, seconded by Mark. Anyone opposed? All right. Meeting is adjourned, and reminder to just see the note in the chat from Karen